Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. With host and founder, Richard Case, and co-host and retreat leader, Kathy Ricconi. Today is our special guest day, where we will hear from a friend in the ministry who will share their insight and stories on truth in this chaotic world. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, welcome, everybody. This is Guest Thursday, and this is part two with our good friend Casey Mulligan, who is a premier economist in the country. He teaches at the University of Chicago, and you were telling us last time, if you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to the courses he teaches, and both undergraduate and graduate. And then he's been involved in global economics and particularly national economics for the White House, and being able to help frame that up. So welcome, Casey. We're looking forward to this part two. And last time we covered as you discussed the implication of a single party, really, that competition has kind of been the hallmark of the United States, and it does have advantages that it kind of keeps things synced up, And I remember when I took economics in grad school, that was a big point that everybody made in around micro and macroeconomics, is that competition actually is really healthy, and when you don't have it, things start to decline, so that if you only have one political party, it starts to just negotiate with itself, and it tends to decline, and the cities are declining, and and the reasons for that. So thanks for sharing that. But a question we've got is, based on your read, where are we economically? Are we flatlined? Are we headed toward a recession? Are we in a recession? How would you characterize the economy of the United States right now?
Well, I think the last time that not last week, but in the last year, we talked about how, we have slow growth, retarded growth, anemic growth. And that's not negative. I mean, a recession, you might say, is negative growth. They change the definitions all the time, but let's say a recession is a negative growth situation. Normally we would grow, say, 3%, 2% annually, and we have reduced growth. Then any little thing can push reduced growth into negative, and that becomes a recession. So it's a little bit hard to say we're going to have a recession. It's easy to say we're going to have low growth. And one of the things that I think a lot of people look at, and it's a huge part of the economy, would be wages. Wages actually have had a negative growth quite a bit in the past 3 to 4 years. And that their growth is going to be slow, I think, for some of the reasons we talked about in the last episode, that people aren't learning at the rate. They're missing out on opportunities to learn from older people with experience. And that shows up in what they're capable of doing, and ultimately the wages. If you're not capable of creating value, your paycheck won't be that big ultimately. Maybe there are exceptions to that rule, but it's tough for the economy as a whole to sustain high wages without having productivity to go with it.
Yeah, and when I know you've looked at marginal income. If wages don't grow on the top side, what's the impact then of inflation cost, as well as increased taxes, increased housing costs, increased insurance costs? For example, here in Colorado, a real estate tax has almost doubled in about 3 years. That takes a lot of money out of somebody's pocket. And then, by the way, insuring those houses has doubled. So I know you're a student of all that. What is the impact of that on the economic condition, where if your wages aren't growing and you've got more expenses because of inflation and then taxes, isn't that going to could that push us into the negative, or is that pushing us into the negative?
Well, it's been already negative on the real wages of people, which is like 70% of the economy would be the real wages. So it already has shown negative. The tendency is for those things to grow. We tend to discover things over time, and so the tendency is toward growth, but it's slowed down by these policy factors. And I view really inflation as the other side of the coin of low productivity. If you're saying, well, I can't produce many widgets per hour, that means it takes a lot of hours to produce a widget, and that's what inflation is. It's expensive. Things are expensive. So there are two sides of the same coin. It's not the accident we see them happening together. And I worry if we call it inflation, tend to put the blame on the Federal Reserve, and they certainly get some blame. But any policies that reduce our productivity are going to be affecting the purchasing power of our workers and also our retirees.
So
yes.
What kind of policies would that be? What kind of policies out there are affecting our productivity?
The main one in the last couple of decades has been regulation and central planning, essentially people in Washington saying what we can do, what we can't do. We as consumers, we as workers, businesses, some of the regulations that get headlines are about how businesses can deal with consumers, whether they can charge too much or too little. But so many of these regulations are how one business can treat another business. These are two very experienced parties on both sides of the table, but we have rules that are aimed to protect one of these people. It's not at all. It's preventing competition. When Rich opened the thing today, a lot of these regulations are motivated by a special interest, doesn't want competition, so they want to have a rule that maybe bans their competitor or at least makes it more difficult for their competitor. I can give an example. There are thousands of these regulations, but a vivid example would be the regulation around internet service that we have on our phones or we have on our cable box at home. And President Obama had put a lot of regulations on that. Really, there were Google people in the administration running that, and they wanted to have some protection against other companies who are also in that space at Comcast, AT&T. So as a result, we had quite high internet service prices compared to, say, other countries, and not very good internet speeds to justify those prices, again, compared to other, UK, Germany, and places like that, Canada. And President Trump came in and said, we're not having regulations like that. In particular, we're not having that regulation. In March of 2017, President Trump at Congress said, no, we're not having those special rules anymore. They're gone. They're considered erased. And immediately, and I mean within days, internet service prices, your monthly plan, came down immediately. It was such a sharp drop in the cost of internet service for consumers that it affected the aggregate inflation rate, which counts everything, right? Aggregate inflation counts housing, food, medical care, internet service, a whole range of things. But it was so huge that it pulled that down. And the chair of the Federal Reserve at the time, Janet Yellen, she had to call a special press conference to explain to people, look, there's not anything shocking happening here. Our inflation's coming in low, but it's just because of what happened, she said, in telecommunications. Wow. And she didn't dig a next level to say, look, there were regulations that were making this too expensive and we got rid of them. But that's what was happening. You have that in internet. You have that in prescriptions. You have that in automobiles. Of course, you have it in energy. You have it in banking, credit cards. It's a huge range of these things. And each of these things add up. Maybe they're not as big. The cars would be as big, but some of the others maybe not as big as the internet service. But when you add them all up, they very easily make things 5, 6, 7% more expensive. Yep. And when I say I'm talking about new regulations. There are regulations we've had around since the John F. Kennedy days. Those maybe add to our cost as well. But the new regulations that came in with President Obama, came out with President Trump, and came back in with President Biden, these are making things more expensive and making the paychecks go less far at the store.
Yeah. And as you look at, let's say the lower class and the middle class, some of the articles are saying that they're having a hard time meeting their monthly expenses, and they're using credit cards to do that. What do you see on a macro level? What's happening with the ability to even keep up with this?
Yes, one of the patterns you see, I say they're regulating so many things. Now, there is a pattern to what gets regulated and what doesn't. They tend to regulate what we call necessities. So a necessity, the technical definition of necessity is not that you would die if you didn't have it, but that lower income people tend to spend a bigger share of their income on that thing than luxuries. Internet service would be an example. A higher income family might purchase more internet service. Maybe they have more cell phone plans in their family or whatever, but not proportionally more. Gasoline is a classic example. A higher income family might purchase more gasoline because they have more cars and maybe they drive further, but not proportionally more. Yeah, so those are necessities. And necessities are exactly the thing that they regulate. And I'm not sure it's an accident that it works out that way, because the people who make the rules are not your lower income people. They're your higher income people. And so if they make a regulation that raises the price of internet service or raises the price of gas, they're like, well, yeah, that takes a little out of my budget, but not much. So it's really hitting the low income people. We call it regressive. It's very regressive. One of the calculations I made is that Biden's new regulations were, as a share of income, costing the lowest income group 7 times more than it cost the highest income group. And I put it into 5 groups. So the lowest fifth was paying next what the highest fifth was. Now you're surprised, and a lot of people are surprised by that. That's exactly what the gas tax has been known to do for a long time.
Sure.
To be basically a 7x difference. And a lot of these regulations are very much like the gas tax because they are raising the prices of necessities.
With that happening, does that then portend a potential, as you defined it, will we just stay stagnant growth? Will it push us into negative growth because of all that?
In my estimate, is it takes off about 3 to 5%. One thing that's a little hard to judge here is a lot of these regulations are illegal. And we're actually in a regime now where they just do the regulation, even though they know it's illegal, basically challenge those harmed by it to go to court and try to sue. And so some people do sue and they win and they get struck down. So it's a little hard for me I'm not a lawyer, it's a little hard for me to judge what fraction of these regulations will be thrown out by the courts because they're illegal.
Yeah.
We saw the student loan regulations, a lot of them thrown out that way. So, but if they were all had to be followed as written, something like 3 to 5% reduction in the purchasing power of our incomes come about from that.
Would that push us into a definition of being in a recession then?
Well, between 3 and 5 is 4 over 4 years. So if you have 4 years of making regulations and it's going to lower our incomes by 4% in total, that would be like 1% a year. So that by itself might lower GDP growth from 2 to 1, but not necessarily to 0. Now they're doing other things that also lowers the growth. So we're kind of in this low growth range and can push in the negative. But with some of the wage numbers, we do see it going into the negative.
Yeah, it's interesting. And if we do start moving even closer to the negative, what impact does that have on the typical, citizen? And does it? I guess what you're saying is that probably the impact is different for the different 5 categories that you said, right?
No doubt that it's an unfair process, and I think we can understand why we got there. And we've seen that historically too. In your big government economies, the government tends to be run by a select group of people, and for the benefit of the select group of people, and not so much for the others. Yeah, that's the pattern that we're seeing here.
Yeah. Do you feel that we're on the verge of going into the negative on a global or not a global United States economy, or do you think we'll just stay kind of flatline?
Yeah, my best prediction is a low growth, but again, when you're at a low number, there's a significant chance that something we didn't anticipate, knocks into the negative. Yeah. Also, on the other side as well, I think since when we first talked on your podcast about these issues, I think some good news on the positive side has been the artificial intelligence, at least for some sectors. It's been pretty impressive, and what a lot of workers can do with those tools. And so that's been a plus side.
Yep.
Surprise.
Sure. As we head into the election, we know that there's going to be 2 economic philosophies with Harris on one side and Trump on the other. Based on what you know today, what would you see potentially would be the outcome if Harris gets elected economically? And then on the other side, what will be the outcome if Trump gets elected, since they probably will have different economic, at least philosophies?
Yeah, they will have different philosophies and different personnel for sure. Very, very different personnel. The government's massive, so one person can't direct it all.
Yeah.
All the personnel in there would really matter. The Harris approach, in fact, President Trump and I brought this out in 2018. I started pointing out to people in the White House, Senator Harris is very much Marxist. What I mean by that, happens that her father taught Marxist economics at Stanford. What I mean by that is the view that profits are evil and theft. That's something, that idea that Marx popularized is still a popular idea today. And that's her view, that profits are evil. My view is if we didn't have profits, we'd still be living in caves. I mean, all the amazing things that we can do together through the market comes very much from people trying to make a profit. And the competition limits those profits, as we discussed. But it's the pursuit of the profits that makes for happy customers and customers, receiving what good value. So her philosophy is lack of profits. I knew that going in there. And I said, one example of how she despises profits is that she has a bill that the majority of Democrats have signed on to that would eliminate profit from healthcare altogether. And actually, people in the Trump White House said that can't be true. It's such a dumb idea. There's no way she could say that. And I had to have to bring the paper and show them, look, this is the bill that's in Congress. The majority of Democrats are supporting. No profits in healthcare. No private health insurance. Your employer offers you insurance, that's going to be illegal. And that's kind of the no profit nonsense logic to things, the philosophy, as you said. If we're against profits, then of course we shouldn't have private companies doing things. I had that put into a Trump speech where Trump was going to say that she wants to eliminate private health insurance. The speechwriters took it out because they thought it wasn't true. So then Trump said it. This is in 2018. Trump said it. CNN called it the biggest lie in presidential history. It was totally true. They never apologized to us for that. But to their credit, they did start to ask candidate Harris, because she was running for president at that time, are you really going to get rid of all private health insurance? And she's like, oh, yeah. I mean, because that's the philosophy. Like, that's just a big mess to have those companies doing that. We should just have the government do it. And, a lot of us have health insurance that we're happy with. We don't want it taken away. So there's a big backlash. And then she backed off and said, well, I didn't really mean that. And then all her Marxist supporters got upset because, wait a second, we're going to get those evil companies out of this business. So she was the first to drop out of the race as a result of that back and forth. So that's her philosophy. Her people take that viewpoint that let's get the government in the business and the business out of the business. And it's very harmful to the extent it succeeds. Now, businesses will fight back and try not to be thrown out of business. But to the extent that they succeed, and there will be some successes. President Obama took banks out of student lending under the same philosophy, that the fact that we had banks and student lending back in the early 2000s meant that they made a profit. That's just theft. We're stealing from the students by having profits. So we'll get the government to do it instead. The government maybe will make money and things will be much better. Well, things have gotten much worse with student loans now that the government took it over. And so that would be the pattern. She would be looking for markets to kick out private business and bring in government leadership. And the student loans are a great example because you can see the reason why they would be doing that. Yeah, it ruins the market. It gives them power, right? And they've been using the student loans as a political pawn. Yeah. So the more markets they can put in the government control, then they can use that authority over that market to try to ensure people to be on their side, to say nice things about the government. People who say bad things about the government won't get. And we've seen that pattern in other countries. It's called the nomenclatura. The people in the party with a capital P, they get access to to the goods and services, and the other schmucks, they don't. They got to get to the back of the line. That's.
If that philosophy is put in place, does that then accelerate the potential to move into the negative economically?
I mean, and this is something that we worked out also in 2018 at that same time. If we were to, what would be the effect on GDP of eliminating profits from healthcare? And it was quite negative, 8, 10, 12%. I mean, maybe it'd be such a catastrophe. The government couldn't even raise the revenue and we'd have such massive tax rates. We discussed that and we tried to be charitable and say, well, let's suppose the government can actually afford all this. Something like 8% reduction in the level of GDP. Now, if you spread that over 4 years, that's a -2 just from that policy. So that would bring you into the negative.
Yeah. Wow. On the other side of it, if Trump gets elected, and of course you've worked with him, what policies would he bring and what impact would that have?
Well, the first time we eliminated tons of Obama regulations of the types that we talked about. And I mentioned the internet service, but we did lots of those. I'm quite confident that that would happen again. I mean, we know most of us are still active who are eliminating those regulations. We know how it's done. We're probably better at it now than we were the first time. President Trump is very supportive. I've never seen him waver one bit away from his stance that I'm going to deregulate. So, and President Biden has regulated at about twice the rate of President Obama. So there's a lot can be done to eliminate regulations. Yeah. I think that would be very positive. It might be hard to find any negatives to undo that. I have heard some things in the rallies and the campaign speeches and the town halls where President Trump has considered some regulations around international trade, I even heard him say something about putting price control on credit cards. That'd be another necessity. That's the type of thing I'd expect Biden or Obama to do. But if he does that, then that will have kind of the same effects. Doesn't matter who does it, it'll have the same effects.
So if I could summarize as we end this, and it's been very informative, is that, and of course you said this the last time, I'm talking several months ago when we were on, that these regulations impact the marginal income, and the marginal income will drive the growth. And we're already flatlined. And if we have more and more regulations, that probably could push it into the negative. And if we went the other direction and took away some of those regulations, it would at least stay slow growth or maybe a little bit more positive growth. Is that a fair summary of kind of what because you've looked at all this data-wise? So
yeah, it would no doubt be positive growth. We had 3% GDP growth, even stronger wage growth. 2017 to 2019, and it's easy to link that to the deregulation policy. We also had a tax cut policy at the same time. That's also contributing. It's maybe a little bit hard to parse it out, but you get basically what you would have is you get some of the growth during a 47th president that you should have been having under the 46th president. So it would be definitely on the plus side.
Yeah. Well, Casey, thank you for giving us that clarity. And I think, Kathy, what we should do is maybe December, January, as whoever president steps in, have Casey back because we'll now know the outcome, and you can kind of take that outcome and tell us based on what happened and what the country voted in, here's likely what to happen. And then I think we'll have Casey on as a regular, at least quarterly, to help us interpret, what this is. Because it sounds like we're at the verge of, we're already a slow growth, flat growth. Things already are in place that maybe could push it negative. And then a new economic program that comes in with either Harris or Trump will have impact. And so, Casey, that it's helpful for our audience to understand, okay, what is the impact going to be? And then we can talk, next time about, what does that mean for us personally? So thank you so much for your clarity. You see it and help us see it. And we're so appreciative of it. And Father, we just pray for a blessing for he and Julia and their family, and that he continues to have this wisdom that we know that comes from you and what you've given him over the years, and to see and watch, and the clarity that we can now understand that. And so we thank you for that. It's a privilege for us to hear it. And we just pray that he continues to be put in that position that can help us understand it. And we thank you in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much again, Casey. Your expertise is so fun to listen to and just so helpful, honestly, to get these conversations going and let people hear it in a way that they can understand it. So I appreciate you joining us for real. If you have questions from today's broadcast, be sure to send them in to us at questions@abideministries.com, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Yep, we'll see you then.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.